Good morning, friends. It's Saturday. We made it through another work week, and I'm back with Chapter 5 of Campaign at Fort Stix. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the mists of time with a story I call Into the Trenches. It was still dark outside when I awoke, and the alarm clock said it was 6:30 a.m. This is when I normally got up for school, but I had not set my alarm because I knew it was spring break. Not only that, but when I did set my alarm, I had trouble getting moving in the morning, resisting the urge to wake up and get ready for school. Today, though, I was wide awake and ready to do things. Curious. The smell of coffee and cigarettes permeated the air, making me wonder who else was up and why they were up so early. I threw the covers back and rolled from the bed. After dressing, I made my way to the kitchen where I was surprised to find no one there. On the table, I found an empty coffee cup, a full ashtray, and a notepad with what appeared to be a drawing of the plumbing plan for the farm. There were notes written at various points on the page, and from what I could tell, there was going to be a lot of digging going on in order to install the septic tank. I grabbed my favorite cereal from the cupboard and poured it into a bowl. After adding milk and a healthy topping of sugar, I took it into the living room to watch television. There was no one in here either. Switching channels on the television, I had a choice of either news, some religious program, or the farm report. Since we were moving to the farm soon, I thought perhaps I should watch the farm report and see if I could learn anything interesting. After 10 minutes of listening to a guy behind a desk talk about pork bellies and soybean futures, I found myself wondering what they did with the rest of the pig and why pork bellies were so important. Then the talk changed to weather patterns and bushels of corn. Needless to say, I was bored almost instantly. I turned the television off and finished my cereal while wondering what I was going to do today. It was spring break after all, and I didn't have to go to school. Letting my mind wander back over the weekend, I remembered that on Friday night I had been getting my bike ready. Yeah, I want to ride my bike. I put my bowl in the sink and headed outside to get on my bike. It was just starting to get light, and I could see okay. I grabbed my bike from its place beside the porch and rode down the sidewalk toward the driveway. That's when I noticed my dad's truck wasn't there. Where had he gone at such an early hour? He was usually still sleeping when I left for school. I let it go and started to head across the drive when he pulled in. He parked the truck and opened the garage door to get something. "Where are you going, Kevin?" he asked. "I was going to ride to the park and see if the other guys were there," I said, realizing that I had not really had a destination in mind before he asked. "Park your bike and get in the truck," he said, throwing a shovel in the truck and closing the garage door. "You can help me get some stuff from the hardware store." I parked my bike in its spot once again and climbed into the truck. Despite my work to prepare it and desire to ride, fate had a different destiny for my bike and I. As we pulled onto the road, my dad turned to me. "So what do you think about moving to the farm?" "I don't know," I started. "It's okay, I guess. But it only has 2 rooms, and after you and Mom take one room, that means I have to share a room with Mark. I kind of like having my own room." "Yeah, I thought of that," he said, watching the road. "It will only be for a little while. Once we get moved in, we'll close off part of the front entry and make another room for one of you." I thought about this and wondered how long a little while would be. With my dad, a little while ranged anywhere from 5 minutes to a couple years, depending on what he felt like doing. I had a feeling my bedroom situation was going to be pretty far down on the list of things to do. We pulled in at the old hardware store in Liverpool and went inside. There were several farmers hanging out at the service counter in the back as if it were a lunch counter at the drugstore. Some were drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, while others shared a box of donuts and talked about their farms. I stopped just inside the front doors to look at the display. There was a 2-headed calf that had been stuffed and stood looking at everyone who came in the doors. Behind this was a glass top counter with several glass jars containing a two-headed snake, a two-headed frog, and several other curious creatures. To this day, I still wonder if some of them were real. My dad found a place at the counter in the back and was paying the man there for the stuff he needed. When he finished, he told me to come on and we went out to the truck where he pulled around to the loading dock to get his stuff. While they loaded the truck, I looked around at the small building next to the loading dock with a nursery sign on it. Inside were several pens with baby chickens, ducks, and other farm animals. A lady came out of the store with a box and went inside to put some chicks in it. When she came out, I noticed the way the door had a turn latch just like I built on Fort Stix, except there was a board on the outside too that turned when the inside one did. After she went back inside, I walked over and opened the door to get a closer look. There was a bolt with washers and nuts instead of a nail holding the two sides together. I found this fairly simple and made a note to make this improvement to Fort Stix. "Come on, Kevin," my dad said as he climbed in the truck. There were a bunch of white plastic pipes sticking out of the back of the truck now, along with a box of smaller plastic fittings. Remembering the drawing, I figured these must be the new sewer pipes. "Hey, Dad," I said as we headed up the road, "are we going to have any animals in the farm?" "We could," he said, lighting a cigarette. "What did you have in mind?" I sat back and thought about it for a minute. At our last house in Arizona, we had chickens in a large coop and one calf that I had bottle fed until it was ready to eat hay and grains. I liked the chickens, but I really didn't care for the calf. When I bottle fed it, it would push the bottle hard as if nudging its mother's udder, and half the time it would hit me right in the center of the chest and take my breath away, or knock me down. As a pretty active kid, I got the wind knocked out of me about every 2 weeks at a minimum just from doing things, and didn't see the need to invite a calf to increase that to a daily thing. "I was thinking maybe some chickens and ducks," I said hopefully. "I like chickens and getting fresh eggs. I also think ducks could be cool if we built them a pond where they could swim." "That sounds like a good idea," he said. "Then we could also have fresh chickens to eat. Let's get moved in and then see about building a chicken coop." I looked up to see we had arrived at the farm. Dad turned the truck around and backed up between the house and garage to park in the backyard. We unloaded the pipes in a pile next to the back porch, and then he opened the garage and backed the truck up to it. "Help me load all these old car parts into the truck, Kevin," he said, reaching for a fender on the wall. He handed me parts as he took them from the walls, and in no time at all we had the back of the truck loaded up with old parts. The walls of the garage were cleaned off now, and it didn't look like a junkyard inside. As he closed the garage, I cast a glance to the field where there were more old truck parts laying around. I considered telling him about them, but volunteering to do more work was not in my nature, so I quietly got into the truck. Not being privy to his plans for the day, I thought we would be going back home and he would go off to work while I took off to find adventure on my bike. It was not to be. We stopped at the scrapyard on the way home and Dad sold off the junk car parts. Then, when we got home, he told me not to wander off because we were leaving again soon. He disappeared into the house to find my mother and see if she was ready to go. Curious, I followed him into the house. I was handed a box with rags and cleaning chemicals and told to put it in the truck while my brother followed, carrying a mop, broom, and dustpan. Then we all loaded into the truck and headed back for the farm, with a stop by a hamburger place to get lunch. Sitting in the dining room of the farm, I had just finished eating when my aunt came in from the front of the house, and my grandpa came in from the back porch. The appearance of more adults could mean only one thing. Plans had been made, which I was not aware of, and would probably involve more manual labor. Suddenly, there was a lot of activity as my aunt and mom went about the place pulling down all the curtains and bagging them up to take to wash. Mark was gainfully employed following my mother and aunt room to room, holding a trash bag open to receive the curtains. Meanwhile, I followed my grandfather and dad as they grabbed their shovels and headed out to the side of the house. As Grandpa leaned back against the porch next to me, he pulled out his can of snuff and got a good dip tucked in his lip. He moved his mouth this way and that for a minute before spitting out a big juicy splat of wet worm dirt on the ground. That was nasty. Why would anyone want that in their mouth? Dad grabbed a can of white paint from the box of pipes and was painting lines on the ground from near the window of the basement out to a large area in the trees between our backyard and Grandpa's garden, which had no trees or large bushes. Here he painted a large box with a smaller rectangle going out the other end. Once the lines were made, I was handed a rake and told to pull the dirt back from the edge of the ditch as they dug so it didn't cave in. I did as I was asked and tried to make sure the dirt was kept in neat piles on either side of the trench. I did disappear for a few minutes as the digging commenced to run to the garage and grab a large coffee can. With the first shovel of dirt out of the ground, I saw night crawlers and earthworms being uncovered. No sense letting all that free fish bait get away. I put a little dirt and some dead leaves in the can along with every nightcrawler, worm, and grub I found. Before long, the trench was complete all the way to the large box Dad had painted, and my coffee can was full of fish bait. So full, in fact, that when they announced it was break time, I ran to the garage for another coffee can to divide my catch because some of the larger nightcrawlers were trying to climb out over the rim and escape. I put leaves and dirt in the second can, along with half the contents of the first can. There were a lot of worms. After poking holes in the lids to allow air in, I snuck into the house and put the 2 cans of worms in the refrigerator to keep them safe until it was time to leave. Aunt Florence came out to inspect the work, carrying a 6-pack of beer with her. She gave Grandpa the beers after taking one for herself and proceeded to walk along the ditch. I walked with her, looking into the hole, but could not understand what was so interesting. It was a long hole in the dirt. I had dug many holes, and they rarely had anything more interesting than a few worms. Tossing their empty beer cans into a pile near the porch, Dad and Grandpa grabbed their shovels and began to dig the big hole. I dutifully raked the dirt back from the edges and watched the hole grow. As the afternoon wore on, the large hole got deeper and deeper until it was necessary for my grandfather to go get a ladder for them to climb in and out. My dad said he was going to town to get them some beer, and I went with Grandpa to his house. Grandma met us at the back door, and after taking one look at us, shook her head and told Grandpa that we were not to come into the house from the utility room until we had washed up and put on clean clothes. Since I didn't have any clean clothes with me, I figured we wouldn't be going into the house. Grandpa's utility room was basically a garage without garage doors. The water heater and furnace were on one side, and there was a large washroom sink and washing machine on the other side, with several rows of clotheslines strung from front to back near the washing machine. It had always struck me as odd that Grandma's clothesline was in the utility room instead of the backyard like most I'd seen. A folding table sat in the middle of the floor, which also doubled as an ironing board, and the rest of the floor was covered with boxes of stuff. I don't know what a lot of the stuff was, but I could see old dishes and knickknacks in some of the boxes. Grandpa's ladders were stood in the back corner next to a mechanic's toolbox, and it was necessary for him to move boxes to create a path to them. As he moved boxes to the side to make his way to the ladder, he stopped with a box in his hand looking into it. Then he turned to me. "Here, Kevin," he said, and waited for me to take the box. "You can use those more than me, and Randy doesn't want them anymore." I took the box and looked inside. It was full to the top with old magazines. Without even having to dig in, I could see Popular Science, Field and Stream, and my all-time favorite, Outdoor Life. "Wow, thanks, Grandpa," I said. He grabbed the ladder, and I turned to set the box down by the back door so I could hold the door for him, but Grandma was already there. I carried the box onto the back porch and waited for Grandpa. "I'm so glad you wanted those magazines, Kevin," Grandma said. "I was going to give them to the church, but they didn't want them." She smiled at Grandpa and watched as we carried the box and ladder off across the yard. As we passed by the garden, I marveled at the neat rows and clean dirt between the plants, There were no weeds. "How do you prepare the dirt for a garden, Grandpa?" I asked as we walked up the hill. "Just turn it over with a shovel and break it up," he began. "Then pull out any large weeds and leave the small stuff to decompose and add nutrients to the soil. After that, you can use a rake or hoe to form rows and plant the vegetables in the tops of the rows." It sounded pretty simple to me, and I decided I would try it in the low area behind the backyard. When we got to the top of the hill, Grandpa let the ladder down into the deepest part of the hole while I took the box of books inside to my new room. I was just starting to look through them when I heard the sound of a large truck outside the house. Looking out the window at the driveway, a very large truck was backing up toward the garage. Going outside, I watched Grandpa and Dad help the truck driver to unload a very large metal tank. It was 6 feet across the end and about 9 feet long. On the side it said 7,500 gallons. This is what they were digging the big hole for. Once the tank was loaded and laying in the backyard, Dad got out the beer and he and Grandpa sat to have one. When they opened the second one, I knew the work was done for the day. I grabbed one of the shovels and headed out behind the garage where I tried my hand at digging a garden. The sun was starting to settle into the trees and I felt like I had been digging for ages. Surveying the work, I was pleased at my progress, having turned over roughly 100 square foot area for my new garden. I pulled the large weeds from the dirt clods and broke them into smaller, finer dirt with my shovel. When I felt it was time to make rows with a hoe, I saw everyone gathering around the truck and I was called to get in because we were going home. Grandpa and Dad got the tank into the hole the next day and proceeded to lay the pipes to the basement. They extended a perforated section of pipe into the rectangular trench at the end of the tank, which was wrapped in cloth and covered with gravel before being buried. They called it a leach field. Sitting on the porch with Grandpa drinking beer, my dad was laying out his plans to bring lumber and paneling the next day to build walls around the new bathroom. He said it needed to be ready because a truck was coming from the plumbing supply with a new toilet, sink, and bathtub the next afternoon. Then he turned to me. "Tomorrow when we get here, I need you and Mark to put all the dirt back in the holes we dug," he said, taking a drink from his beer. I looked over at the massive hole with the tank and followed the ditch back to where it disappeared at the corner of the house. That was a lot of dirt. "As soon as you get it done," he paused as if thinking, "I'll take you guys to A&W for lunch and root beer floats." My eyes lit up. We rarely got to go to A&W Drive-In, and they made the best root beer floats anywhere. "Okay," I said excitedly. I could already taste that ice cream, and I knew I would have a chili dog as well. The next morning when we arrived at the farm, I didn't hesitate. I told Mark to come on and grab 2 shovels to start filling in the trenches. Visions of hot dogs with chili and cheese and root beer floats kept me motivated, and I worked as hard as I could to get the dirt back in the holes. Mark, on the other hand, didn't seem to care that we were going to A&W. He put in half shovels of dirt at a time, between whining this was too hard and his hands hurt. I was getting aggravated. I knew I was bigger than him and could do more work because he was small, but he could at least try. I stopped after what seemed forever and leaned my head against the shovel to catch my breath. I was soaked in sweat and could feel the dirt on me from where the breeze carried dust on the air from the shovels. I looked over at Mark and he was just standing there looking at the hole. "You aren't even helping," I said in a low tone. "Don't you want to go to A&W?" "I don't know," he said and dropped the shovel. "I just don't want to dig anymore." "I don't either," I said, "but if we don't fill the trenches, we don't get to go." "Okay," he said and ran off into the house. "Mark!" I hollered as the screen door slammed. I looked at the ditch. We were about halfway from the house to the big pit. I set my mind to the task and started shoveling dirt again, but each scoop felt heavier than the last. I tried pushing the dirt in with the shovel, and that seemed to work okay, except that the round head of the shovel didn't push much. I dropped the shovel and went to the garage. I seem to remember seeing a big flat rake that my dad said was used for cleaning horse stalls. There were no horse stalls in the garage, and I hadn't seen any horses in the vicinity, so I wasn't sure why we would have that rake, but I felt it could be useful for filling the ditches. Now that we were here, my dad had cut the padlock off the garage side door next to the opening where I went in and left it open. It made going in to get the rake much faster, but the bees did not miss out on their opportunity to buzz around my head saying hello. Returning to the trench, I used the rake to pull the dirt into the trench from the opposite side, and it was much easier than the shovel. It seemed like no time at all had passed before I was to the big hole. Mark reappeared just as I was coming to the last corner of the big hole to be filled. The dirt from two sides sloped into the corner, which was still at full depth in the corner, a hole large enough for a full-grown person. "Why didn't you fill in this corner?" Mark asked as I walked across the top of the tank, smoothing the dirt as I came toward the last corner. "I was waiting for you," I said, smiling. "Why?" he asked. "I don't want to dig." "Oh, I wasn't waiting for you to dig," I said, as I laid the rake down, smiling evilly. "I was saving a space for you." I lunged and reached for him, causing him to shriek and run off to the house. I could still hear him screaming for Mom as he ran through the house looking for her. Sure, I might get yelled at, but he deserved it for abandoning me. I pushed the last of the dirt into the hole and put the shovels and rake in the garage. The sun was already almost straight overhead, and I knew it was lunchtime before my stomach grumbled to remind me. I found Dad and Grandpa inside working on the new bathroom. They had built a wall across the family room from beside the kitchen entry where it turned 45 degrees and then another 45 degrees to stop between two large windows. This formed a small room with the potbelly stove in the corner across from the window on the opposite wall. The bathroom door opened in the 45-degree wall across from the stove. Inside the bathroom, a new shiny bathtub sat against the far wall under the window, with just enough room to walk between it and the pantry, which was now a linen closet. On the opposite wall, a new toilet sat in the corner, next to a small vanity with a sink. It was kind of weird to see the new stuff placed inside the old house. After finding Mark, my dad took us to A&W as promised, and we brought the food back to the house so my grandpa and mom could eat with us. After lunch, I went off to work on making the new latch for the door of Fort Stix like I had seen at the hardware store. Sleep came easily that night and every night for the rest of spring break, as I found myself thoroughly exhausted upon arriving home from the farm each evening. I had made the new latch for the door, finished turning over the garden across the entire area behind the backyard and garage, and planted it with seeds given to me by my grandpa. I even found some time to explore the garage loft in more detail. Surprisingly, I also found myself waking before the alarm every day, looking forward to going to the farm. There was even a sense of anticipation of the day we would move there permanently. I hope you enjoyed this look into the campaign at Fort Stix. That's all for now, but I'll be back again next week with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.